Hey, first of all, before we get into it, thanks for joining. I really appreciate your time. Make sure you subscribe and like so that we can keep pushing forward these videos.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself? Younger, more beautiful, more perfect.
For me, transitioning was the closest I could come to killing myself without actually doing it.
One single injection unlocks your DNA and will release another version of yourself. This is the substance.
Just loving life.
Hearing people say this made me so much happier. This alleviated my pain. With all of these mental struggle, sense of it on my own, and consuming so much of the trans narrative.
This video is really about being able to dissect the nature of this movie that we call The Substance, which is really more than a flesh horror movie. It is actually, in my opinion, a very prophetic movie about the nature of our human vanity, desires, and longing for the divine. Now, The Substance is a 2024 flesh horror film with Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. And so in this film, audiences are confronted with this very horrific and gross idea of what it means to actually be masculine and feminine, that grapples us, that convicts us of doing better. And in this film, the trouble is Demi Moore's character, Elizabeth Sparkle, has really long outlived her glory days in Hollywood. And many people know it, including herself.
People always ask for something new. It's inevitable. At 50, well, it stops.
She's a very beautiful actress, Demi Moore. And I think it mirrors a lot of what Hollywood actresses suffer through and go through. They have to get this ointment or this elixir, or go through the knife, be able to appear more young, to get more jobs. And this is exactly, on a very heightened scale, what the movie does for us as the viewers. Putting ourselves into the shoes of actresses and actors alike, those who have to actually undergo certain types of surgeries or procedures. And like this horror fantasy film, The Substance, I definitely have been fascinated by the film, but also grossed out like many other people.
Been a slight misuse of the substance.
At the root of it, there is this longer and more drawn out desire that has really perpetuated itself across human history. Every culture testifies to the ache for immortality and beauty. St. Augustine wrote, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." The philosopher Pascal described this as the infinite abyss in every human soul, a void that cannot be filled. He knew a few things about numbers. Not only was he a philosopher, but also a mathematician. This idea of trying to become something more is really at the heart of what every human psyche and soul longs for. This, in my opinion, is also directly related to the idea that gender and our current culture of gender dysphoria and wanting to transition and building on this idea that men can become women or women can be men, boys can become girls and girls can become boys, a fictional but dangerous fantasy that allows one person to actually excuse one's old identity for a newer one. Big celebrities like Jazz Jennings and others. You have Bruce Jenner turned into Caitlyn Jenner. These individuals all have a history of dysphoria, but the reasons may not always be very clear when we start to medicalize it.
Hello, my name is Prisha Mosley. I'm a detransitioned woman who began a medicalized gender transition starting as a minor. Transition did not fix my distress. I went to my doctor suffering from anorexia, anxiety, depression, and a host of other mental health issues.
I was born biologically female. When I turned 18, I did go to Planned Parenthood. I just stated that I had gender dysphoria and they gave me testosterone a week later. Before I went on hormone therapy, I wasn't required to see any therapist or any sort of a doctor at all. About a year and a half after I was on hormones, I decided to see a therapist about getting approval for top surgery. I walked in on one appointment for half an hour, and then she emailed my insurance for approval, just like that. Even at this point, when I was passing as a man, I still had these doubts in the back of my mind that
I was raised in a very conservative area with very strict definitions on what it meant to be a man or a woman. Even now, years after, I mean, I haven't been on hormones in like 5 years at this point, almost 6 years, and I still have a lot of atrophy and issues with the bathroom. I have a second minor surgery to drain the fluid, and I had nipple grafts in 2020, right before, like a year before I decided to detransition. I tried to kill myself. And was almost successful. I put myself in a coma for 4 days, taking pills. And after I woke up from the coma was when I kind of accepted that something had to change.
The reality of gender dysphoria is something that I have personally dealt with, not in my own body, but more intellectually. In college, I actually wrote some papers on gender dysphoria and the reality of how Sarah Haslinger, who is a PhD philosophy teacher, professor, has broken down the idea of sex and gender into bifurcated ideas. Sex, gender are two things apart from one another completely. And so for me, I definitely didn't believe in that. I think a lot of people have their predilections and discomfort with the idea that gender can be its own thing apart from sex. And so I wrote papers on it in philosophy. My professors didn't like the idea of me promoting it into competitions because effectively I would get canceled. Skip forward past graduation, as I actually got a job with a really well-known sexologist and psychologist, Michael J. Bailey. And he has done the gay twin studies. He's a very liberal-minded and fair and caring guy. But he also wrote a book about the man who would become queen on the idea of transsexualism. So prior to 2013, the idea of gender dysphoria was never a thing. It was more so about gender identity disorder, right? So an identity is different from dysphoria in the body. So gender dysphoria to dysphoria about more so your body. They actually tried this experiment of trying to transition people who are born in the wrong body. And they played that out. John Money also played that out. Very notable for his studies with David Rayner, who was born a boy, a biological boy, but because a circumcision that went wrong, actually decided that socially, if we just teach her to be a girl, then we can make her a girl. And that is a very, very, very special case, but there's many cases like it. So what happened? Well, Ryan T. Anderson actually explains it very, very clearly. It was activism. It was political activism that allowed people, medical doctors, to become assuaged and acquiesce to the pressures of LGBTQ moms, of trans activists who wanted to malign and overthrow the more sober-minded, more critical individuals, whether they're liberal or conservative, doesn't really matter. But those who did have a knowledge of how gender dysphoria was not really a concept that needed to be played out in the sense of medical bodily transitions, because the previous data showed otherwise, that there were actual harms or at the very least no changes to depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, or other mental health issues that came alongside of thinking that one was born in the wrong body. So the history seems to show that there's a lot of political issues at play. Fourthly, because this all kind of comes into a head here with the idea that, you know what, if we can change ourselves, whether it's Elizabeth Sparkle in the movie The Substance, or many of these individuals, Jazz Jennings or Chloe Cole, who is somebody who has detransitioned and been a very vocal Republican of sorts. She took LSD after she detransitioned and became a Christian. And so she's become a very, very staunch supporter of Christian values, of being conservative now, when she was, in fact, in a very irreligious household and also transitioned at a very young age, around 13, 14. She got a mastectomy at least 14. And that has ruined her life, as well as many other individuals. So in 2025, the US Department of Health and Human Services, at the current date and time, we know that there are major reviews of the pediatric diagnosis of gender dysphoria and treatments. And it's concluded that evidence for medical interventions was of low certainty, flagged risk for infertility, bone density loss, and recommended prioritizing psychotherapy instead. I worked with Michael J. Bailey as well as Lisa Littman and Ken Zucker. These are foremost psychologists, medical practitioners who have treated people with these illnesses, whether it was very differently than gender dysphoria, a type of hermaphroditism, intersex, and then those who actually have gender dysphoria. We can now say with more certainty, because science is about progress, right? With more certainty that all these issues of bone density loss, of atrophy of the vagina, of the mastectomies gone wrong. We literally have people who are mothers now who transition from female, male to back to female who can't even breastfeed their children because you can't bring back your breasts. You destroy your breast, your plastic surgeon removes your breast. You don't have breasts, your nipples are inactive at that point, and you can't put your nipples back in those places. This is a real horror film. This is a real flesh horror film. If we had any other, the substance, I don't even think comes close to the reality of the situation, because even though it's a fantasy, it is a fictional idea. In the span of a decade, we have thousands of young adolescents and young adults going through these procedures that have yielded very, very little results of improving their mental health. The lie with Elizabeth Sparkle is that if you were young, you had a better version of yourself, you will be loved. You will find your importance and your value. And that's the same exact lie that we have with those children and teenagers, especially because it's like this competition of the old self and the new self, the lesser self and the better self. She began to realize that she really hated herself with a better version of herself. And that oneness that the substance creators, right? I'm talking about the people who actively created and promoted the drug underground because it was a off-label black market drug as depicted in the movie. We know that this drug, puberty blockers and surgeries, are also something that is to be questioned, but we continue to act as if it is the only solution to gender dysphoria. So in a sense, it is a real horror story because it has affected not only a few celebrities and people who have access to wealth, but those who literally have no access to wealth, who can go on puberty blockers after one visit to a counselor, literally one, right? You do not have to get your parents' permission even to start socially and medically transitioning. This is the real horror story because we have deluded ourselves into believing that we can become whatever we want. And the lie that Elizabeth Sparkles was sold on being a youthful, more outgoing version of herself caused this rift in her own identity. And this identity malfunction that we are having as a society has implicated in our children, has implicated actual suicide, harm, and long-term ill effects in these children, girls and boys alike. Now, where's the hope in all this? It seems so dire. I know, since I have personally been canceled multiple times in different ways by people personally, and then also in my PhD program. I had to quit my PhD program in clinical psychology because I had professors and clinical directors who disagreed so vehemently against what I spoke up for, which is children should not transition. I'm not talking about adults, just children. The substance ends with Elizabeth actually trying to kill herself. Now, her new self. And in actuality, her new self kills her. Because as a Christian, I believe that there is an actual spiritual reality to this. Suicide is not the answer. Murder is not the answer. But in Christendom, in the idea of Christian theology, I believe that just as Christ was put to death and he was raised, we also are called to a higher reality of we have to live a new life. We are born again as the Gospel of John talks about, Jesus says that you must be born again if you want to be able to inherit eternal life. So what can we do to be saved, right? Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to be saved, their life, who wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. In other words, the way forward is not the endless reinvention of self. We've all had a goth phase or a punk phase or, questioning sexuality or identity or career and all that good stuff. But it is the death to obtain a more mature and spiritually awakened, enlightened life that is in Christ. So as Paul, the apostle, says in his writings from Galatians, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. When you put your life into the hands of Jesus Christ, he gives you actual life. He says in John 10:10 that the thief came to steal and destroy, but I have come that you may have life and life abundantly. My friends, if you don't know the love of Jesus, he has good plans for you. And we may be lied to by the devil, because he is real too, with this substance. Take it. It will create a new life for you. You can have fame, you can have power, sex, and prestige. You can have all these things. I'll give it to you. Just take the substance. And the substance is a lie. And very much the same way she looked at it, it was desirable, it said, and she ate of it and gave her knowledge. So this is the good news of Jesus Christ today, is that regardless if you have tried the substance, if we have tried our own versions of the substance, right? Through drugs, pornography, through different identities, it could be good things like sports and so forth, or religion. People try out Christianity as a religion, but that thing can't save you. You need to have a born again relationship with Jesus Christ. And I just ask you, if you want to be a new person, you don't have to change your gender to be able to escape your sex, your lot in life. People who change their genders, who want to be able to age backwards and be a better self, come to all of us. But Christ came so that we may have life and have it to the full. And so there is peace, there is joy, there is purpose, there's meaning and significance and belonging in Jesus Christ. And I can tell you firsthand, I've been through some stuff. I've been canceled, I've been maligned, I've been bullied growing up because I was a rough and tumble boy. I was more effeminate. And it came into my favor because I realized that all of us are faking it to some degree, unless if we come face to face with God, unless if we come face to face with the reality that Jesus Christ came and he made a way for us to have a relationship with God. We will never truly be satisfied. Hey, thanks for listening. I really appreciate you watching, and leave some comments below if you have any questions, as well as what your thoughts are about the comparison between the substance and the reality of gender dysphoria here in the United States and abroad. This is a very controversial topic, but I really appreciate your engagement. Make sure you like, subscribe, and follow for more. Have a good one.